Getting started.
Okay, great.
All right. Hello, climate leaders. Thank you so much for watching today's presentation. We have my colleague, Christina Gilardi, here to give you a presentation on research. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Christina.
Thanks so much, William. So my name is Christina Gilardi, and I'm the Director of Research and Learning at Public Health Advocates. And so my job is to help all of our programs, like Stockton Rising, understand how to research and think about what sort of information you need to be the best advocates, right? So what is going to be compelling information to convince elected officials and other folks in your community that the issue that you're fighting for is really important. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what is research and how we do it. And then we'll do an activity that sort of gets your gears turning about how to go about conducting research. Yes, I'd love to hear that. So we're going to do some introductions. Here's a general agenda. So what is research? Why do research? How do we do research? And then we'll do a digital scavenger hunt and wrap up. So the first thing I'd love to do is I'd love to know all of your names. It's nice to meet you all. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how long you've been involved with Stockton Rising. And when you hear research, what comes to mind? Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's just go around the room.
Yes, Leona's correct.
Okay. Awesome. So everyone has the same answer to that question? Okay, great. Well, you can skip the second one then.
My name's Pat.
Hi, Pat.
And research. I love research. I love research. First you gotta research on finding out what's reliable information. Right. Then don't ever believe anything that you hear and have to what you see. Do your research. You know, my son is 40-something years old and he has probably 60,000 volumes of information in his brain. And he said, what did I learn today? I'm like, oh, I went to please. But he loves to take something and go to something else and steps into it. Because he's trying to find out that it's like a root.
Right? Great.
And so that's why I like research, because it really gets you involved, A, and B, it really gives you a broader way of seeing whatever it is that you're looking for.
Awesome. So Pat, a lot of what you just said are things we're going to touch on in a little bit. So I'm excited to have the conversation about how do you know if it's a trustworthy source? It's a huge part of doing good research.
That's me in America.
That's, I mean, I can understand that sentiment. Who wants to go next?
And research is always like, I look at it as like scientifically. It's always like a trial and error. Information that it's not reliable, and you have to look at the sources. You don't know who published it, if they're like, have the right type of information. Is it a fact or is it an opinion? Yeah. So all you have to consider all.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks so much, Raina.
When I hear the word research, a lot comes to mind. I feel like it's a never ending and
Yes.
It's something that you really have to look into from everything you do. And sometimes you can add to that.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. And did you say your name's Christina also? Euphrosyna. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Would you like to go?
My name is Liliana. I'm an executive for research. I want to do a lot of what you said. I recall that when I do research, we have to look at the source of the information. And then again, there's publishing. I like to always look for the publishing. There's a numbering out there. It doesn't stop there. It's just hard.
Yeah. Great. Great. And I know you too. It's nice to see you both.
So with that, we can probably get rid of this.
Yeah, let's do that. So it sounds like you all have a pretty good understanding of research. So please let me know if any of this feels like repetitive, but I'm hoping that there's something new to add to your, the way you think about research from this conversation. And I'm going to stand up because I feel like it's more interesting for me to move back. So thank you for that. We are going to next just quickly dive into an overview of our organizational values. Have you all seen this before? So public health advocates really is trying to do bold work, right? So you'll see up at the top, we are bold, we are strategic, we get things done, and we have integrity. And under each of those are additional sort of sub-values that we like to really help guide our work. And the one that we're going to work on today is this one. So we value and use science as our guide, right? And that is really the heart of how we're bringing research and why we're bringing research into the work that we do. And there are lots of ways that we do that. So we'll talk all about that. So you have a goal of aiming to connect South Stockton residents with the tools and resources to save money, improve your climate and health, and empower residents to take control of their communities. And to do this, you're going to need research, right? You're going to need to be able to show what the challenge is, where there are disparities, right? Where some communities have different experiences than others. And also this is going to help to raise awareness and media attention, right? So all of those things are going to be really motivated by research. Yeah, exactly. So what is research? We talked a little bit about this. Does anyone have a sense of different types of research?
Yesterday I was at Home Depot and thinking about them here because we said scientific. And I was talking to one of the guys that works in Home Depot. I had a chihuahua with me. And it opened up a conversation how he had a German Shepherd dog to get a French bulldog or whatever it's called. And he said, the thing is that there's so many dogs that are hiking, I'm not home. When I go home, I'm tired. I really need to do my research.
Yeah.
I'm finding out what kind of dog is compatible with me. So, and like I said, research is just, it's anything you want to know that you just want to get to know it.
Yeah. So anything you want to know and you want to get to know it deeper. I really like that. What else would people say? Open-ended questions, right? So we can ask close-ended questions, which are yes or no, right? Or here are your 4 choices, or open-ended questions that allow sort of people to think from or to provide their own answers. Yeah.
Like trying to differentiate one thing from another.
Great. So trying to differentiate one thing from another. What makes these 2 things different, right? Or the same?
I did that in science class. It is red and gold and light and dark.
Hmm.
And
Oh, yeah.
Develop faster in light or dark. Under what kind of conditions?
Yeah.
Moist or wet.
So a lot of what we want to think about is like, what are the conditions that research is done in, right? That's really important to sort of help us understand the findings that we get. Great. So there are, this is a lot of jargon, but I'm going to try and break it down. So there are 2 different like ways to think about collecting research. One is primary research. That's the research that you conduct, right? So I want to know how residents of Stockton feel about climate change, or I want to know what they would do to improve sort of the heat map of the city. That is us going out and asking people directly. That's called primary research, right? We are the primary interaction. Then there's secondary research, and that's saying what data or research already exists that I could use, right? So a lot of the research studies that you see, statistics about climate change, like those are things that have already been collected that you're going to want to find to help to make your case. Okay, so those are the 2 differences. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. So there are lots of different things, and these are just examples. But for primary research, lots of times we do community surveys, right? We go out and ask people how they feel about the communities that we're living in. We can conduct focus groups, right? Small group discussions. We can do interviews with people who are considered experts. So that could be a resident or a person with like, book knowledge. And we can observe, right? So for example, you could go to a park and see how many people are sitting under a shaded tree versus sitting in the sun, or how many trees are there, right? So that would be observational. Any thoughts or questions about those? Has everyone heard of these types of research?
We did that in college in Hawaii. I sit in the light to see more female or more male between a certain hour of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, I did a study where I watched undergrad students see how they used a communal space on the university campus, right? And like if there was a difference between, I was interested in gender differences, so I was looking at differences between different genders and how they use the space. And then secondary research, this is the research again that already exists that might help to inform your case. So there are a couple of ways that we can do, there are lots of ways we can do this, but these are some examples. One is a literature review. So you're talking about scientific papers, right, Raina? What's out there? What can I learn from that's already been done? Policy research is looking specifically to see what policies may have been passed in other cities that you might want to replicate, or states you might want to replicate, or ones that you definitely don't want to replicate, right? Because you see that those are like, maybe that's the way people tend to do it, but you know that that's not like going to have a positive outcome. And then publicly available data. So that's things like the census, right? That says this is the number of people who live in your city, you know, resident income, things like that.
My son, real quick.
Yeah.
A couple weeks ago, my son this guy took the census and he put dots in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and on the side it had white, black, brown, yellow, whatever, and then and other. And so you can hit all of them through the board, and then you can hit white, and it shows the white concentration, the black concentration, the brown concentration. But when I looked at it, I got rid of the white and I focused on the black, right? And it got bigger and bigger. Now it doesn't tell you your city, right?
Mm.
But as it got bigger and bigger, I could see clusters of where the black was heaviest, right? And I said to him, look at this, these are prisons.
Mm.
These are our prisons. And the heavier concentration of African American population was literally in the location of a prison, not cities. Because nobody doesn't have beach. It's a prison.
Yeah.
And it turned out that it uses systemic racism on your thing. And I said, this is California.
Yeah.
I didn't go into the United States, just California.
Yeah.
So look at closer.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great use of secondary data and publicly available data, right? Data that you're able to find, and you can then ask the questions yourself, like, where do I see different populations like clustered? And then there are ways to even overlay that even more, right? So do we see supermarkets or fresh food? Do we see access to transportation? You know, do we see differences in heat index, right? Or tree canopy, the things that you all might be interested in. So there's lots of available data out there. You don't have to collect it all. There's a lot of stuff out there already. So there are also two other ways to think about data. One is like who collects it. The other is what kinds of questions do they ask? So qualitative data is data that isn't numbers. What's an example of qualitative data? That would be quantitative data because it's the number of people. Yeah, it'd be qualitative data.
Oh, yeah, like, what are the effects of people that work the park? What are the
What about what part of town has better grocery stores than the others?
Okay, so you both are posing questions that could be either qualitative or quantitative, depending on how you ask the question.
Oh, yeah, how many stores, that's numbers.
Yeah, so how many stores, we could quantify what the qualities are, right? So we could say, is there fresh food and vegetables? Are they clean? Do they have enough people working there? Those would be things we could quantify. But to make it qualitative research, we could make an open-ended question, right? What do you like best about your grocery store? Tell me what you like best. That would give us words, not a number or a letter that we could then say, oh, you know what we're seeing? We're seeing bunch of people answered about fruits and vegetables, right? We can turn that into a number, but what we're getting is words that we can like understand the nuance, right? So maybe someone's saying, well, my grocery store doesn't have enough red apples, right? That's different than just saying apples, because they're very specific about red apples. But I wouldn't put in a multiple choice list red apples and green apples, right? Like I would just say apples. So it gives you a little bit more nuance to what people are thinking about. And then obviously focus groups, right? We're having a conversation. That's data, that's information, but that is qualitative data because I'm asking you an open-ended question and you're giving me several sentences of an answer, perhaps. Same with interviews and observation. Observation, I guess, could also be quantitative if you're like, how many people did I see? Which is actually what you were talking about. And then anything that's on paper, like a literature review where you're reading something and you're trying to like understand what's in it, or policy research is typically considered qualitative data because it's a narrative, right? It's lots of words, like all the words that just came out of my mouth. Yeah.
Like another word for like more depth.
Say that again. Yeah, so nuance is like minor differences between things that make them sort of different. So the nuance between like what kinds of apples is an example, right? So maybe someone likes, I don't know, Fuji apples and someone likes Granny Smith apples, right? That could be considered nuance. Kind of context dependent though, because that could be really important if you're making an apple pie, right? Because you want the green apples to balance with the sugar.
So like, for example, like if we want to say, so like East Stockton and South Stockton would both be communities who have food deserts in Stockton. So we'd say the nuance of South Stockton being historically redline, or?
Yeah, I would say that's like, I would say the context is, I don't know if that's quite nuanced. Nuance is like a smaller difference.
So you have an identical twin sister, but she doesn't wear glasses.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a much smaller difference.
Okay.
That has such a monumental impact that it's hard for me to call that nuance, but I can see why you're using that as an example. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then quantitative research, data that is numbers. Yeah, quantity versus quality, right? So what are some examples of quantitative data?
People here like water better than you.
Right, exactly. Raise your hand if, and then you count the numbers. Okay, how many people are sitting under a tree? You know, how many different types of apples are there? I don't know why apples are on my mind. I don't like apples. Okay, so community surveys have quantitative data often because you're asking multiple choice questions or yes, no questions, right? That's something really easy to tally. 4 people chose A, 7 people chose B, quantitative data. Literature reviews can be quantitative data because you might be interested in seeing how many different sources are saying the same thing, right? Policy research the same, and publicly available data is most often quantitative data. Most often, if you look at the census or you go to the Department of Public Health, you're going to see numbers. That is quantitative data, so quantity versus quality. And I want to say that like neither is better than the other. I should actually have a slide that says this. Neither is better than the other. They both tell you important information. And so ideally you get a little bit of both, right? You get a little bit of quantitative data and then you learn more about the numbers by asking open-ended questions through qualitative data collection, right? So you said you like apples. Tell me about the apples that you like, you know, et cetera. So why do research? We've talked a little bit about this, but why do we do research? Yeah. Find out about something, right? You have a question, you want to find an answer. To make something better, absolutely, right? To change the status quo, you want to know what's going to make it better. Great. Anything else? You just want to know. Curiosity, right? Absolutely. So there are lots of reasons to do research. You named a lot of them, right? And it's really helpful if you're doing advocacy work to say it's not just the 7 of us in this room, right? It is 100 people in our community. We have asked 100 people, right? It's a lot easier to convince someone to make a change if you can say, it's not just me, I'm representing information that I collected from a whole host of people, right? It's a lot easier to say, I collected information from 100 people than, I talked to a few people, right? So it really helps to build your case about why it's important. It also helps because, like you said, like it is really important to be able to change the status quo. You have to know where you are, where you're trying to get, and what are the many different ways to get there, right? So like I said, you can pass a policy that has good intention, but has really bad outcomes or has no impact, right? Why not see who else has done this and what the effect has been, so you can make sure that your city passes a policy that is going to be effective.
So question.
Yeah.
So many people say, stats are stats.
Yeah.
And they are not foolproof.
Yeah.
Okay. But flip the coin, people love numbers.
Yep. It's complicated.
Why like numbers if you can't foolproof it?
Yeah. So the thing about research, and it's one of the prompts that I have for when you're thinking about the sources, is that it's biased, right? So every single research project is conducted by humans, and we all have our own biases. So the questions that we ask are shaped by the way we view the world. And then the information that we collect is shaped by the way we view the world, right? So part of understanding breaking that down is understanding what is the bias of the person who is doing the research, what is their motivation, and what is your own bias when you think about the data. So a perfect example is like pharmaceutical companies, right? They're like, yeah, this works for everyone. Well, their motivation is to make money, right? It would be nice if their motivation was clearly health, but they like to make money. So we have to be really thoughtful when we see research that says pharmaceutical company A's drug is better than pharmaceutical B's drug, because we need to know who's paying for that research, right? If it is the pharmaceutical company that clearly has better outcomes, we want to make sure someone else has done the research too, and we're looking for multiple sources. So it really is about, you mentioned at the beginning, the multiple sources. That's kind of critical to make sure that the information you're getting is legit, right? And not biased in some way. But all research has bias, and it's the way it is. But it's also cool, like a community group like yours, you have different perspectives to bring to the table to talk about what questions do we want to ask, right? From all of the different perspectives you have, what questions do we want to ask? And then I got this finding, like, what could that mean, right? From my experience, it might mean A, but from your experience, it might mean B, right? So it gives us a nuanced way to look at things, right? To separate the details. Is that helpful?
No.
I mean, I don't know why individuals want data, but then don't trust it. I think that's I think it's a not understanding. I think it's a not understanding how to read research and to know if it's legit. That would be my guess. Because if you have those skills and you can figure out if something's true, it's a lot easier to know what to trust.
Because I could throw numbers at people all day long. You're kidding me.
Yeah.
But they're not going to take the time to go check it out.
Mhm.
Yeah. For the majority of them.
Yeah.
I might Google while they're telling me that.
Oh, that's me all the time. Like,
Yeah. Right? So I was just curious why people they like numbers, but yet nobody believes them.
yeah. And my guess is it's not having taken the time or having the skills to do that research. And that's true. I don't know about all of you, but my high school didn't do a good job at teaching me how to dig for that information.
School taught us credible resources, but it wasn't until Delta College that showed me peer-reviewed articles.
Yes.
That's something I hope that we could try to do when you're studying about Stockton policy. Are there peer review articles or trusted sources within the state that pushes their data?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I'm happy to help you all sort of dig through. when you have a sense of what questions you really want to ask and what information might be helpful. Yeah. Okay, so this is a slide that we often share at Public Health Advocates about how we do our work in general, right? Has anyone seen this other than staff? So we're often trying to change policy, right? These are the things that come together. Our research, what's happening at the local level, right? So what Alyssa was just saying, how do we find out what's happening? Media advocacy, getting people aware. Policymaker education, getting in front of the city council to say, did you know? Community mobilization, who are the 100 people who you're going to get to show up with you at the camp? And partnership building, right? William was telling me earlier about all of the folks who have come to do presentations for you, right? That's a great example of the partnership building that you all are doing. And all together, those things can influence your policy reform. But research is really a huge part of all of it because it is used in your media advocacy, right? It is used for your policymaker education. Policymakers are some of those people who really do want data, even if they don't always believe it. Community mobilization, sometimes you can get people like really riled up by showing them something that they thought they knew, but you're like, here are the numbers to prove it, or here are the 400 people that have the same experience. It's not just you. And then obviously the partnership building to coalesce around the single idea. But research really helps to drive a lot of that. Any thoughts or questions? We can share these slides with you too. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have told you that. Yes. So how are you going to use research and data? Have you talked about it at all? How you're going to use it?
Well, when we go out and tell people or whenever someone,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of it would be backed up by research when I tell them, so they know I'm more trustworthy.
Yeah, absolutely, right? You build trust by giving information.
She gets today's food price. That
That was a great answer.
That was a fantastic answer.
That's a great answer.
Teach that one yet.
Yeah. Anything else?
How your food
Well, I'm thinking of doing research or doing my information at schools. So I think it would be really interesting if I start like my research there and then try to like find ways in which I can tell them how it was helpful for me to deliver that information, how it affects them.
Yeah. Yeah.
My question will be how I'll be like this.
Yeah. So thinking about what questions you're going to ask and information you're going to share, right? And how important it is that that first piece of information you give is true, right? So that you build that trust. Absolutely. Anything else? Anyone else thought about how you might use research or data?
I thought no, it's evil.
For evil. So here are a few ways.
Just kidding, just kidding.
Here are a few ways that William and I have talked about sort of that you might use are things like community surveys, right? Are you trying to understand sort of how the community feels or what matters most to them? An understanding of what's out there already, right? So how have other people engaged other students around climate change in schools, right? There are probably people who have done that. You could do some Googling and find out, so you can build off of that instead of starting from scratch. I used to think that I was just really lazy because I like to build off of other people's stuff. And then I realized it's actually just helpful. It's strategic. And so I like did a reframe on that. What other policies and schools have put in place perhaps, right? And then that publicly available data, again, thinking about what information is out there related to climate. And there's a lot. We are just past like the federal legislature has just been having conversations about climate change, right? They would not have been able to pass policy without access to available data. And Lord knows they fought about it for like 30 years. So yeah. So those are some examples, and I'm happy to talk to you all more as you start to get into your projects, so what that might look like.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So if and when we do research projects, are you available to us if we were to have questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just remember, everyone we have training sessions with, you have access to them. So if you want to contact them, you can reach out to me and I can give you the best contact.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a team of 1.5, so I have a half-time staff person that works with me. So ideally, yeah. So ideally, we could do something where we do sort of a group setting, but happy to do one-on-one stuff if that's needed too. Yeah.
Do you have any sites? I know that Google, where you can find sites or papers or
Yeah, Google Scholar, is that what you're thinking of? Yeah. So that is typically how I do things now, because I don't have access to like a research institution anymore. So Google Scholar is typically the way I go. There are lots of times though you can't get data for free or articles for free. So if you come across things that you really need, let us know, we might be able to find it. The other thing I have found is that almost every single researcher is happy to send you a copy of their paper if you send them an email. Yeah. So unless there's a reason they can't share it, like they've signed something saying they won't distribute it, everyone is so excited to have their work read that they will share it.
Wow.
like when you Google something on it comes, their summary comes up, right? Like the abstract.
Yeah.
And so I can't find anything on that would give like a complete.
Yeah.
But like, but even then, like
Yeah.
it's only a summary.
Yeah.
So you said we can, the person, the author.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the way to do it. More and more research is becoming more accessible. So there are scientific journals now that require you to provide the text. It's called open source, and that's becoming more popular. But it is still very common to find research that you can't access and you have to email.
So how can you have access to research?
Because they're super expensive. It's like $10,000 for a single journal access. So like, that's just not something that's doable for us, but we do have university partners that I can say, hey, can you send this to me? Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know if you have access to like, because I went to UC Merced and I remember we had a database for like research. Do you think that you can use that? Like if I go back and because I have my email password.
Yeah.
You think that would still be available?
Right.
You should try. Yeah. So some schools you have access forever. I went to UC Davis for grad school and they cut me off 6 months later. They were like, you're done.
Really?
Yeah. So, but yeah, you should totally check.
Yeah, I should go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're still pending, like you said, once you graduate, they cut you out.
Yeah. But definitely check. Yeah. And if there are articles that you can't find, we can always see if we can track them down for you.
Why would you?
Well, I don't know if you know.
I thought you had some.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say though, lots of information is available that's not academic research. Academic research has like this idea that it is the highest quality, and it depends, right? Just like every other research. It's kind of why if you can only get the abstract, you can't necessarily trust it because you don't get to read how they really did their work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I studied human development, right? And so the ways in which human development research often works is you're bringing individuals into a space, a lab, which who has time to come into a lab, right? And who does mostly? Most of psychology research is based on like undergrads, right? Like that is not representative of the human experience. So part of, yeah, or babies whose parents have time to bring them into the lab. So it really is important to be thinking about these things and like, what are the factors contributing to the research? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about those factors and how to identify a trustworthy source. Before we do that though, William asked me to give you a very important piece of information today, which is that you can tell me if this is a trustworthy source. How about that? He asked me what my anniversary date was for working at Public Health Advocates. Does anyone can guess?
What age or that?
HR would know, it's true. What was my anniversary date at Public Health Advocates? How long have I been there?
Oh, that question. The problem child.
Yes, the problem child.
Survey.
This is it.
No,
That was the other lady.
I've been there for a year now.
Oh, a year now or a year and a half?
Year and a half.
Started in March of 21.
Oh, nice.
So remember that, March 2021.
Yep.
Like,
I love it. That's why I wish I'd been there for 6 years.
so your position is called
Director of Research and Learning.
research and learning. Now, is that equivalent to some kind of data analysis?
It includes data analysis. Yeah. I have a PhD in human development.
Sorry, doctor.
Yeah, so I started getting a master's and I was like, oh, I really like this. And my program had funding. And so I was able to stay and just learn. And I never expected to get a PhD. My dissertation was on how childhood poverty affects the adolescent brain when looking at emotion in faces.
Oh, I would love to read that.
You can. It's really bad.
Is it public?
No. No, so this is an example. Is this too much of a segue?
Oh, no.
Okay.
This is why I told you an hour and 30 minutes, because they will take you on a journey.
Okay. So basically what I found is I looked at, they had pictures of faces and they were in a neuroimaging machine and they had to respond to 2 questions. One was, how sad does the face make you feel? And the other one was, how wide is the nose? These are questions that came up, were developed by white researchers, right? Who did not think about like racial differences in nose width, for example, right? So that was the neutral stimulus where you were supposed to like not have a response. What I found was differences in the neutral question in comparison to sort of this plus sign that they see, which is not very interesting, but that I use as my neutral. And I found differences based on like staring at the nose and them responding, how wide is the nose? But only for faces that were neutral. So not happy faces, not sad faces, and not angry faces. So what I found was that for kids who had more years of poverty, they had higher reactivity in the region of the brain that is associated with stress or fear than kids who did not. And they had lower reactivity with the top part of the brain that helps to calm down. So they were, the way I interpreted it was there was more ambiguity. They didn't know what that face, if that face was threatening, if that face was sad, right? They were trying to process it more, which makes sense, right? If you live in a stressful environment, you may have to be more on your toes. Yeah, but you're interpreting things all the time, right? And then the point that I made was, imagine now, being me right now, looking at all of you, none of you are smiling at me. None of you are showing like an expression that is very obvious. If I had this overreaction happening in my brain all the time, which I had to work through it, right? Like it would be really hard to navigate the world because you're constantly questioning what people are thinking behind their like flat like face, like their neutral face. So it was that was what I was really interested in. And yeah,
That's
right?
like doing an interview. Like I'm like, can you do give me some kind of face and I'm doing okay, and it makes me nervous.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's one of the things that you think about, how many people do you interact with every day that aren't giving you a clear expression of how they're interpreting your interaction. And so my sort of interpretation was that kids who grow up under stress are paying more attention because they're trying to understand their circumstances, and the impacts of that later on are like their brain's preoccupied when you're asking them to do something, or your brain's preoccupied when they're standing in front of a room trying to have a conversation. The problem with that is that the faces of the stimuli, we were asking them how wide is their nose, and the faces of the stimuli were half white men and women, and then half people of color, right? So there isn't even an equal balance of the faces that they're looking at. Right. So I was really interested in learning neuroscience, but I do not feel that like the research that I did, it doesn't represent like my values and like what I think research should be around like racial equity. So that is why I didn't pursue publishing it. Like I learned a lot, but it didn't align. Yeah. That help answer your question?
Are you still able to do more human development research?
No, I mean, definitely not that. Neuroscience research is super expensive. But no, I mean, I do survey development and evaluation now.
So let me ask you something. If you felt that this was a bias take on more white than people of color, or individual people of color, how come you didn't get it published so people would know this stuff that they're teaching us is crap?
Because my advisor who owns the research doesn't buy into that. She's a white woman who is indoctrinated into research. Hopefully this doesn't go public. So
Jonathan, make sure to cut that part out.
No, I mean, I think that's like the challenge, right? So researchers are very invested in their methods. And I came into it as a community-oriented person who'd done community organizing forever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Former mentor joined the educational leadership doctoral program POP, and pretty much they didn't want to publish your research because it wasn't very
Yeah, exactly.
So I was like, I'm never going to
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll find it a lot of places, and part of it is just continuing to push back. I actually have this really cool book.
They got rid of fact tests because they were not according to the person's cultural upbringing.
Yeah. So I'm reading this book with a bunch of other researchers called Decolonizing Methodologies, which is all about trying to think about research from a non-white perspective and how to do it differently. So it's a pretty cool book. It's pretty nerdy if anyone wants to take a picture of it. Yeah.
So can you find your dissertation? Is it online?
It's not, because I didn't publish it, no. Yeah. I mean, if you really want to read it, I can email it, but. William, could you remind me to do that? Because I'm actually I have a pen right here, I'll write it down. If you really want to.
They can reach out. I'll give your contact information and they'll reach out.
Okay.
Just your email.
Yeah. So how do you find a trustworthy source if all these sources are biased, right? Like how do you figure it out? So you check the source, right? You all talked about that. You figure out who published it, right? And you figure out a couple other things. You question their biases and your biases, right? How am I reading this? What might be motivating? You find the original source, right? So lots of times if you do a Google search, you'll get an article that mentions something, and sometimes they won't they'll present a statistic, but they don't say where that statistic came from. That is not a good source, right? And they have to say, as said, by who, what year, and have a reference in order to be a legitimate source. Otherwise, it could be something their aunt said over the dinner table, right? Right? It could be something that you said in this room, just sort of making a joke, right? We just don't know. So we always want to make sure that the original source is there, and that if it's not, we follow the link until we get there. And then find multiple perspectives, right? So there are some statistics like how old the earth is, right? That you're not going to necessarily find a citation because it's now considered generally known, which I don't actually know what it is. It's like 4 billion years or something, right? It's considered generally known, so there's not going to be a source. But part of what you do is you find multiple sources that give you the same information. And then you can say, okay, this feels like it's pretty trustworthy, right? But all of that starts with checking your source.
But then you have skeptics like me that's like, because I don't like that carbon dating. What do we have to compare to 10,000 years ago? Who was there? Tell us.
Yeah.
I saw this on Earth, and so 10,000 years later, they're saying, I remember when I was 5, I saw this on Earth. We don't have it of carbon dating. What are you comparing it to? What do you have that's 100%? That's me.
Yeah. So I think that it is great to be a skeptic, right? You're less likely to get tricked into fooling something or being fooled. What'd you say?
I hate propaganda.
Yeah. And part of it is also understanding how they went about figuring out carbon dating was effective, right? It's true. There is a chance that carbon dating is not accurate and everything that we think we know is we're going to find out is wrong. And at this point, science is pointing in that direction. So when what one of my grad school professors said to me was, every study is a small piece of the pie for the specific context in which it was done. When you have 1,000 pieces of pie that point in the same direction, right? It's a lot easier to say, okay, that seems like that is what we know right now. But at any time, things could change. Right? That's just the nature of science. And it's the beauty of science, right? It means that we're going to continue to update our knowledge as we get more information.
And when proof goes back that I am alien blood, I'll let y'all know. I'm RH negative.
The other thing to think about is questioning your biases. I just wanted to mention this specifically. Has anyone heard of confirmation bias? Yeah. Does anyone want to share what they think it means?
I don't really know what it means. I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's the idea that I believe something and you say something that agrees with my belief. And I'm like, see, it's true.
Yeah.
Right? But what did you say?
I said confirm.
Yes, exactly. It's like confirm bias, confirmation bias, right? I have a belief. You now tell me it's true. It's got to be true. 2 of us have said it. So that's another piece of the bias that you want to check and why it's so important to find multiple sources. Because it could be that the first source you find does agree with you. And it could be that 700 other sources do not agree with you, right? So it's important to check that out. What's that?
And one person said you look like the horse shooting up. 3 people say you look like the horse kind of by the side.
I think that's a good way to think about it. I would say confirmation bias would be, I think I look like a horse. Oh, one person told me I look like a horse. I must look like a horse.
No, I have that one.
Okay, so these are some basic things to look for. And there are lots of other things, but I think really making sure you get to the original source and checking your biases and doing that through multiple perspectives is critical. Okay.
You know what I love out of research? Aha.
Yeah, Eureka.
Aha. Aha.
Yeah.
You come to a point going, aha.
That is my favorite part of science too. It also doesn't happen all that often, FYI. Most of my day is on an Excel spreadsheet or writing questions. So it's not that, that's not true.
Mine's at a very small level, so I get ahas.
Okay.
Yeah. People really get to the ahas.
Every day I get ahas. It's just not necessarily research. It's just humans. We're all fascinating. Okay. So I'm going to ask you all, you can either do it as a group of 4. Are you participating?
No, I mean, I can if they want me to.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, are we done with the presentation portion?
What if I go through the activity? So if anyone watching
Okay,
wants to do it, and then we'll stop?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the goal is to work in either pairs or as a group, whatever works for you, to find some information related to climate change specifically, since that is the focus of the work you're doing. So find one statistic, okay, one news article, one research article, one state policy, and I gave you an example of where you can find state policy information, and one local policy or plan related to climate change, and then come up with a campaign header based on the information you found. How are you going to summarize it all to be like, here's what I learned and here's my pitch? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so would you like to all work together, or do you want to do it separately? How would you like to do it? Okay, great. So we will stop